You ever design something so clean, so airtight, that even you can't break it? That was me. I built the financial automation system that made our startup look bulletproof. Clean dashboards, real-time tracking, investor-ready visuals that could make a spreadsheet look like a TED Talk. I didn't build it to hide anything, but they used it to hide everything. I wasn't in the room when the pitch decks went out. I wasn't on the call when the numbers were adjusted. But I saw the aftermath, and the truth is, it wasn't just numbers they manipulated. It was me. They let me go the week after I lost the baby. No warning, no empathy. Just a cold email and a colder severance agreement. Company restructuring, they said. But I knew better. You don't restructure someone out of a job 2 days after a miscarriage. You erase them. And they thought I'd disappear quietly, that I'd bury the grief and the guilt and just move on. But here's the thing. They forgot who built the damn system. They thought they fired a grieving accountant. What they really did was fire the one person who knew where all the fake money lived and how to make it bleed. So no, this isn't a story about heartbreak. It's not even a story about revenge. This is about what happens when the wrong people get too comfortable lying and the right person stops being quiet about it. Stay with me, because what comes next was never meant to happen. You know that person at work who never misses a deadline? The one who answers emails at midnight, eats lunch at their desk, and makes the whole system look like it runs smoother than it really does? That was me, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I believed in building something that mattered. I thought that if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and kept the chaos in check, I'd be safe. The company wasn't flashy. It was one of those sleek, sustainability tech startups, the kind that brands itself as mission-driven, puts plants on every desk, and brags about carbon-neutral coffee pods in all-hands meetings. It looked ethical. It felt ethical. But if you've ever worked in Silicon Valley, you know the difference between how things look and how things really are. They called it optimization. I called it duct tape. I designed a reporting system that automated our financials, everything from profit loss summaries to investor reports. It was fast, clean, accurate, and maybe too good. Because once the numbers started glowing green, people stopped asking where they came from. At first, it was little things. Rounding up revenue here, smoothing out overhead there. Just until the next round closes, they'd say. I didn't love it, but I told myself it was temporary. That this was how tech worked now, lean, scrappy, flexible. And when you're the one making the dashboard, it's easy to believe the picture you've painted is still the truth. But deep down, a small part of me knew. This wasn't my system anymore. It belonged to the illusion. They saw me as the reliable one, the quiet genius, the one who never asked too many questions, just built the tools to keep the machine running. But the thing about perfect employees is they're only perfect until they see the machine for what it really is. And once that illusion breaks, you don't get her loyalty back. You get silence. And in my case, you get something much, much worse. The miscarriage happened on a Tuesday. No warning, no pain, just silence, like something slipped quietly out of existence before I even got to know it. I didn't tell many people, not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't ready to share something that didn't even get the chance to live. I stayed offline for 3 days. No Slack, no inbox, no spreadsheets, just the hum of the fridge and the soft creak of floorboards in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. By Friday, I got a message from HR. Hey, can we hop on a quick Zoom? There's nothing quick about being asked to smile while someone reads a script about restructuring and changing company priorities. They said it had nothing to do with my performance, that it was part of a strategic shift. I was one of 3 roles being phased out. But I knew. I knew. It wasn't about strategy. It wasn't about budget cuts. It was about timing. I'd become a liability. Not because I wasn't working hard, but because, for once, I had something in my life that wasn't about them. And grief? Grief doesn't fit on a productivity chart. They wanted someone who'd nod in meetings, pump out financials, and pretend nothing was ever wrong. And I'd just become a reminder that life is unpredictable, that even perfect employees can break. So they cut me loose, told me they were so sorry, and offered a severance package. They called it generous, but what they were really buying was silence. The paperwork was clean, too. Buried in it was an NDA, the kind that says, "We'll pay you, but you don't get to talk about this. Not ever." I stared at it for a long time. It was just lines of legal text, but it felt like a coffin lid. And yet, I signed. Not because I forgave them, not because I was okay, but because I needed to breathe. I told myself I'd walk away, that I'd rest, recover, figure out what came next. But that night, as I packed up old work files from my laptop, I found something buried deep. A copy of the original system I'd built. Untouched. Raw. Before all the filters. Before all the edits. The version that showed the truth. I didn't know it then. But that tiny folder. That was the crack in their foundation. And I wasn't done yet. A few weeks passed. Not much changed on the outside. Mornings blurred into afternoons, and most days I didn't even bother opening the curtains. But one morning, I woke up to a notification, a calendar reminder of all things. It was an old recurring task I'd forgotten to delete. System backup, 9 a.m. That's when I remembered. I still had access to the sandbox version of the financial system, the one I'd coded before the CTO brought in the growth team, the clean version, before the filters, before the fog. I clicked it open. The dashboard loaded like muscle memory, fast, smooth, elegant, and then I saw them. Numbers that didn't line up, accounts with names I didn't recognize, invoices from vendors I'd never seen, but all with the same approval stamp. Something was off, and once you see one crack, you start seeing them everywhere. I opened up the transaction logs and traced the data back 3 months, then 6, then 12. There were dozens of line items tied to consultants, but the addresses were shell offices, recurring payments for services that didn't exist, inflated valuations based on projections that were pure fiction, and tucked inside all of it, right there in the metadata, my name, my system, as if I'd signed off on all of it. They didn't just fire me, they used me. I'd built a machine that made fake money look real, not by forging documents or creating scams. No, they were smarter than that. They fed just enough real data into my system and watched it do the rest. It was beautiful, in a horrifying way. Efficient fraud, all wrapped in green fonts and pie charts labeled sustainable growth. And the worst part? It worked. The investors never questioned it, because no one wants to look too closely when the numbers are that good. I closed the laptop. My heart wasn't racing, not yet. It was something deeper, colder. That quiet shift in your gut when you realize you didn't just lose a job. You lost your name, your code, your hands, became part of something that was never yours. But now that I'd seen it, really seen it, I couldn't unsee it. And silence? It was no longer an option. They called themselves a climate-forward company, used buzzwords like decarbonization, net zero, ethical IAI. They planted trees for PR, held town halls about sustainability, posted filtered photos of solar panels and reusable water bottles. But underneath all that was a different kind of ecosystem, one built on image, not impact. And the irony? They used my math to make it believable. See, back when we were small, I created a projection tool. It took raw numbers, product costs, carbon offsets, energy usage, and turned them into impact metrics. It was built for transparency, to show what we were really doing. But somewhere along the way, they rewired it, not with code, with intent. They changed the inputs, subtle tweaks, rounded figures, smoothed assumptions. They started estimating future impact as if it had already happened. So when investors asked, "Where's the proof?" they could point to clean dashboards with bold green numbers. Projected reduction, 72%. Energy savings, $1.8 million per quarter. User growth, exponential. And nobody questioned it, because it looked right, because it came from my system, because I had unknowingly built the perfect face for a very profitable lie. I kept digging. Investor memos, cap table revisions, internal pitch decks, all inflated, all supported by outputs from the tool I had written line by line. And there, in the fine print, my name again, at the bottom of the spreadsheets, at the top of the internal Slack channels they never removed me from. I wasn't just a bystander. On paper, I looked like a co-conspirator. That's when it hit me. They didn't just erase me when I was vulnerable. They kept me, as a name, as a shield, as proof that a trusted head of finance had overseen it all. They needed someone believable to make the unbelievable look real, and I was that person, until I wasn't useful anymore. That's what made it personal. Not the firing, not the grief. The betrayal wasn't in losing the job. It was in realizing I had helped them build a lie, and they were planning to pin it on me if it ever came crashing down. They built a green empire and buried me beneath it. But here's the thing about empires made of smoke and numbers. It only takes one spark to make the whole thing burn. I printed the NDA out one morning, set it down on the kitchen table next to a cup of black coffee, and just stared. It looked official, clean, precise, like everything they did. 6 pages of "you agree not to," a few paragraphs of legal armor dressed up as kindness, and right there in the middle, the line that mattered most. All intellectual property created during your tenure is owned by the company. At first glance, it felt airtight, but I knew better. Because here's the thing. The original version of the system, the one they built their fake empire on, that was written before I ever signed their full-time contract, back when I was just consulting, working late nights from my apartment, before I was pulled into the meetings, before the perks, before the politics. And back then, I wasn't building for them. I was building for the idea of them, what I thought they were. So no, they didn't own it. Not the foundation, not the clean logic, not the code that really worked. I checked the timestamps, verified the commits, cross-referenced everything with the contract they had me sign weeks later. And that's when the calm hit me. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't the one on the defensive anymore. They thought they had silenced me, that a check and some legalese would make me disappear, that I'd grieve quietly, maybe go teach a finance class somewhere, maybe fade out of the industry. But what they forgot is that paper only matters if you don't know how to read between the lines. And silence, it can be a weapon, or it can be a shield. I hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't posted, hadn't vented, hadn't leaked a single thing. But I had something far more powerful than a voice. I had proof. Proof that the system was built before they owned it. Proof that the data was doctored after it left my hands. Proof that the illusion they built wasn't mine to carry. And suddenly, the NDA wasn't a wall. It was a door. Because if I played this right, I wouldn't have to shout. All I had to do was open that door just wide enough for the right people to look in. You don't blow the whistle in tech, not unless you're willing to be blacklisted, buried, and branded as difficult. And I wasn't interested in being a martyr. I wasn't here for justice in headlines. I was here for impact, the kind that lands in inboxes and makes grown men panic. So I didn't leak anything. Not really. I just opened a window and let the truth drift out on its own. It started with a quiet email. No signature. No traceable metadata. Just a link. Clean, cold, and real. The kind of link that made you stop breathing for half a second when you opened it. It went to one person, a partner at one of the venture funds from Series C. Not the loudest one, not the biggest, but the one who always asked the most questions on investor calls. The one who noticed details. Attached was a copy of the real financials. Raw, unfiltered. No green graphs, no estimated impact. Just the guts, the vendor fraud, the inflated assets, the ghost payrolls, and most importantly, a comparison file. One from before they started altering the system. Timestamped, logged, verified, side by side. A mirror. Truth versus performance. I didn't explain it, didn't narrate, just let the math speak for itself. Because when you're dealing with people who live by numbers, the numbers are what cut deepest. I shut the laptop, pulled the blinds, and waited. Not in fear, but in stillness. The kind of stillness you feel right before a storm, when the sky doesn't crack, but your bones know it's coming. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. The person who opened that link, they wouldn't be able to unsee it. Because once the illusion breaks, once the numbers stop lining up, trust dies fast. And in the world they lived in, trust was currency. And just like that, I had started the run on the bank. It started with a press release. Polished, polite, predictable. The kind of corporate speak that tries to sound calm while the ground's already cracking. We're undergoing a strategic internal audit to ensure alignment with investor expectations. Translation: someone found the bodies. Not long after, I saw it. The first crack on LinkedIn, their head of growth, was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. Then the CFO's bio quietly vanished from the leadership page, and then the press started sniffing. Whispers. A tweet from a niche tech account. Then a blog post from a journalist known for digging where no one wants her to. They didn't have everything yet, but the scent was in the air. Something didn't add up. And behind the scenes, panic was blooming like mold under fluorescent light. One investor pulled out of the next round, then another, and then someone, maybe that same partner I sent the link to, forwarded the files to the SEC. And just like that, it was official. An open investigation. Potential misrepresentation of financial records. A subpoena here, a flagged asset there. I didn't celebrate. There were no champagne corks, no secret smiles in the mirror. I just sat at my kitchen table. Same table where I signed the NDA. Same chair I cried in when I lost the baby. Same place I realized I'd been erased. And now? Now I was watching them slowly unravel. Not because I screamed. Not because I fought. But because I was careful. Because I waited. Because I knew exactly where the cracks were hiding. I watched emails get leaked. Internal Slack messages taken out of context and weaponized. A screenshot of a CEO joke about carbon credits being the new crypto went viral. And the comments? Brutal. The green empire was starting to rot from the inside. And no one could figure out where the infection had started. But I knew. It started in the quiet. In the silence they mistook for surrender. They thought I'd go away. But I didn't vanish. I listened. I waited. And then I lit the match they handed me and dropped it into the heart of everything they built. You can always tell when the suits start to sweat. They don't scream. They don't flinch. They just go quiet. Like prey, sensing the brush shift behind them. It started with the legal team. They sent out a company-wide message reminding employees not to speak to the press. A standard line about maintaining professionalism during times of uncertainty. But behind that calm wording? Chaos. You could feel it ripple through the system. Meeting invites doubling. Private calendars suddenly blocked out for urgent reviews. Lawyers looping in more lawyers. And then came the flight. The founders, they tried to spin it first, that they were stepping back to reflect and realign. But we all knew what it meant. They weren't realigning. They were running. Internal chats leaked, little glimpses of fear behind boardroom doors. Phrases like containment, limit exposure, find the breach. One message, half redacted in a screenshot, simply said, "We need to find out who sent it, fast." I smiled when I saw that, because they never did. They looked for a whistleblower, some disgruntled ex-employee waving a flag in a blog post. But I gave them nothing. No tweets, no articles, no interviews, just silence. And a storm. SEC started freezing assets. Big-name investors began pulling support, quietly deleting their proud partner badges from websites. One of the firms even issued a formal apology to their own backers. And just like that, reputations began to slide. See, in the corporate world, it's not guilt that kills you, it's optics. And when the optics are bad enough, even your allies start to act like they've never met you. What fascinated me most wasn't how fast it all fell. It was how brittle it all was to begin with. The empire wasn't built on steel. It was glass. Polished, pretty, but hollow. And once a single crack showed, everyone scrambled to not be standing on it when it shattered. And the men in suits, the ones who smiled so wide in their investor decks, they were the first to panic. Not because they didn't expect consequences, but because, for once, the consequences weren't falling on someone else. They didn't know who did it. They just knew someone did. And that uncertainty, it was delicious. Because while they scrambled to protect what was left, I was already gone. I didn't take a victory lap. There was no post, no speech, no final middle finger thrown into the air. Just a quiet deletion, one file at a time. LinkedIn, gone. Company email archives, wiped. Slack channels, left without a word. I moved out of the city 3 weeks after the news broke, left behind the noise, the startup dinners, the rooftop happy hours full of people pretending to care about changing the world. Traded it all for a 2-bedroom rental near the Oregon coast. Quiet place. No more smart thermostats. Just salt in the air and time that didn't feel like it was sprinting toward someone else's deadline. Most people thought I dropped out, took the money, burned out, gave up on impact work. Let them think that. What I really did was begin again, on my own terms. I started picking up freelance projects, small nonprofits, real causes, places where money wasn't the point, and honesty didn't feel like a liability. No more fundraising calls, no more greenwashing reports, just truth, in numbers. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fixing someone else's lie. I was just working, quietly, with integrity, like the way things were supposed to be before the noise took over. There were days I missed the power, the feeling of sitting in boardrooms, of building tools that scaled across millions of dollars. But then I'd remember that power never belonged to me. It was borrowed, conditional, fragile. Freedom, though? That's something you can own, but only if you're willing to give up being seen. And that's the price. To vanish from the world that once cheered you on and realize that peace, real peace, comes when no one's watching. I didn't just disappear from the company. I disappeared from who I was in that world. And somehow, in the silence that followed, I found something more powerful than revenge. I found myself again. I read about the trial in a coffee shop. Headline buried halfway down the page. Startup CEO faces SEC charges for fraud and misrepresentation. No name in the title, no dramatic photo, just a short paragraph squeezed between two brighter stories, a celebrity divorce and a new app for sleep tracking. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry either, just still. The article mentioned the freeze on assets, the breach of fiduciary duty, the class action filings from former employees. It even hinted at investor deception. But there was no mention of the system, no hint of how deep it really went, and absolutely nothing about me. Not a word, not a line. And that was perfect. Because if I've learned anything, it's that justice isn't always a courtroom climax. Sometimes it's just a quiet return to balance. I didn't need a thank you. Didn't need someone to vindicate my name in a news cycle that would forget it tomorrow. I just needed the lie to stop. And it had. The green empire was no longer a darling. Investors were walking away. Regulators were circling like vultures. The same people who once wore badges of honor for being early backers were now editing bios, deleting tweets, pretending they hadn't been complicit. No one clapped, no one cheered. But the machine stopped humming. And sometimes, silence is the loudest kind of justice. A friend once asked if I regretted it, if the price of being invisible was too high. I told her this. I never wanted credit. I wanted peace. Because not all heroes wear capes. Some just delete their old logins, close the laptop, and go live a life no longer built on someone else's lie. The ones who really win, they don't look back, and they don't look for credit. They just know what they stopped. And more importantly, they know why. If you had told me a year ago I'd end up here, in a small coastal town, sipping black coffee on a porch that creaks, I would have laughed. Back then, I thought success meant something different. Titles, proximity to power, building things that scaled. But now I know better. Because the real legacy isn't in how loud your impact echoes. It's in what survives the silence. Some nights, I write letters I'll never send. One in particular, addressed to the version of me who still thought loyalty would protect her, the one who thought working harder could earn her safety, the one who thought being essential meant being irreplaceable. I'd tell her this: they will not clap for you, they will not mourn your absence, but your worth has never been tied to the noise they made when you were useful. I'd tell her to save her fire, not for burning bridges, but for lighting her own way out. I'd tell her not to apologize for being the one who saw too much, felt too deeply, or left too soon. Because some truths, they don't need to be shouted. They just need to be honored. I carried a lot out of that place. Grief, for sure, but also clarity. And a reminder that when the world strips away your titles, your emails, your logins, all that's left is you. So the real question is, who are you when no one's looking? That's what I found out. In the quiet, in the aftermath, in the stillness after the storm. I'm not angry anymore, not bitter, just aware of what I allowed, what I believed, and what I'll never accept again. This wasn't revenge. Not really. This was reclamation of self, of silence, of story. And I took all of that with me, not in a folder, not in a headline, but in the way I show up now, unshaken, unattached, unapologetic, and that's worth more than anything they ever tried to take from me. If you've made it this far, thank you. This wasn't the kind of story that ends with a courtroom slam or a viral headline. There was no hero's parade, no perfect quote to wrap it all up. Just a woman, a decision, and a quiet kind of justice that most people never notice. But if this made you feel something, even for a second, then maybe you know what it's like to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to be erased, and still find a way to leave your mark. So if you've ever been pushed out of a room you helped build, if you've ever carried the weight of silence and still found a way to stand tall, drop a comment, tell your story, or just say, I felt that. Because stories like this, they don't make headlines, but they matter. And if you believe quiet strength is just as powerful as loud revenge, if you believe that sometimes the best comeback is becoming someone they can't touch, then hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this one. We're just getting started. Sometimes justice whispers, but it's still justice. And you're not alone.